Hello folks, Northern Exile here for another batch of Hobby Nightmares. If you like what I do, or you think you're going to like the video, press the like button. It's 1 second of work for you, but it means a lot, and I mean a lot, to a guy like me. We are a small YouTube channel, so any likes that we get make us seen more by the YouTube gods that are hanging over us as eldritch horrors, you right? If you want their gaze to push us up the old tree there on YouTube, then you need to like the video. It means a lot to me, so thank you very much if you do that. If you want to send in any hobby nightmares, they are to hobbynightmares@gmail.com. That is hobbynightmares@gmail.com, and I'll be able to read out your lovely tales from the hobby. Right, let's jump in, as we have two quite lengthy ones today, so you may get a bit more content than you normally get, but we'll see. Lithobius says, "Hey North, you can call me Lithobius, Lithobius, my current internet alias. It's a common centipede that lives under rocks and in rotting wood and eats bugs in the yard/garden people generally don't want. Okay, cool. I've been listening to your Hobby Nightmares for about a month or two whilst I paint after my partner told me about the series. He wasn't sure I'd like the channel since some of the takes can be a bit hot, but between the ridiculousness of the stories and your reading style, we listened to a few that were so funny I actually had to stop painting." That's very nice, that's awesome, that's awesome. "After listening to more, I think conservative politically in the UK is pretty moderate compared to conservative politically in the United States. So while I am known to put bits of purple and blue in my hair sometimes, I don't think we're particularly far apart in our outlook on life. There's a lot to be said for bringing people together over shared interests, given the degree of polarisation that plagues both the internet and meat space. That is true, and you sound like a cyberpunk girl, and I like it. Anyway, one of the videos I listened to yesterday whilst I was banging out some Skaven tales had a story about a stolen magic binder, and you asked why there are so many stories about stolen magic cards. I remember doing that, yes. I can't read the YouTube comments on my PlayStation, so I figured I'd finish up one of the nightmares I'd started from my time as a manager in a friendly local game store in a small US city and send it in. The facts of the case really illustrate why magic theft is such a problem beyond just the value of a Black Lotus. Insert a tea sip if you wish. Thank you very much." Sometimes I'd like to know, those of you out there in the comment section who have had nightmares read by me in the past, do you stop painting to listen, or do you carry on doing what you're doing? I don't know. Carrying on. "Shortly after I graduated university, my partner and I moved to the city where he was attending grad school, so that we could manage with one car. I was still commuting into my state's main city at the time for a part-time weekday job, and to make ends meet, I needed a weekend job too. I was lucky enough to run across an opening at a game store walking distance away from our apartment. They scheduled me on weekends, and I'd commute during the week, and on any days off from both work, I'd go to the coffee shop on the same street as the game store and the work on my portfolio. Sorry, I'll read that again, because this is me being a ridiculous person. They scheduled me on weekends, I'd commute during the week, and on any days off from both, I'd go to the coffee shop on the same street as the game store and work on my portfolio to eventually get work in my field. It was one of the best and one of the worst times in my life. I was grinding constantly." Yeah, and that's because you're feeling very fulfilled because you're doing a lot. Do you know what I mean? I'm just going to call you Lith because it's easier. Yeah, you're doing a lot, so you're being very fulfilled, but you're not spending any time enjoying your success. That's why it's one of the best and worst times in your life, you know what I mean? You need a balance. Anyway, after a few months, the owner of the store promoted me to weekend manager, probably because I was reliable and could do the admin work he didn't want to, but couldn't trust other staff with, such as payroll and scheduling. It was also a busy, growing store with a lot of foot traffic, as we were downtown in a very walkable part of the city with lots of restaurants, bars, tourist attractions, and the local high school. Like most friendly local game stores, we ran a lot of card game events, hosted some role-playing groups, had a pile of demo board games, and also some TVs and consoles. We carried a very basic Games Workshop range, and I never saw Warhammer played in the store. Our miniatures gaming at the time was mostly HeroClix and a few War Machine players, largely because the cost of those games was much lower. So it was mostly card games, especially the secondary Magic the card game market, that kept us afloat. Insert a sip of tea if you wish. Even if you don't tell me you're a woman in these things, I can always tell. You know why? Because most of the time, there's an insert tea if you wish every couple of paragraphs, right? It's almost like I'm being mothered or told what to do. I don't know. But I will take a sip of tea, thank you. A bit of Yorkshire. Because the store was walking distance away from the public high school, a good portion of our regulars were kids that came to hang out and play Yu-Gi-Oh! Or video games instead of getting into trouble. The city had been a destination for immigrants and refugees, and some families had built successful businesses out here in America. So, while the public school kids belonged to households with a wide range of income levels, most were minorities. The primary way to tell the rich and poor kids apart was how expensive cards they had in their decks, because they all dressed and behaved in a very similar way. Our store became known as a safe space as well, as the other hobby store within walking distance was run by a really awful person who made it clear to any non-white kid that they were not welcome there, such as loudly referring to them as monkeys, quote unquote, to other customers while they'd be minding their own business looking at cards and comics. Dude, where do you live? Are you like in the deep south in the 1960s? What is going on? I think this takes British people back a lot because we don't understand why these places still exist. Do you know what I mean? Because we don't have anything like that over here. No matter how much the news, like BBC and people would like to tell you that we do, we don't. We genuinely don't have places that are this bad in the UK. And if we do, they're called out and shut down rather quickly. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, it just doesn't happen. It exists in the UK, don't get me wrong, but it's more like under the surface. There's nobody being overt and stupid like this. Do you know what I mean? Like, not from what I've seen anyway, and I've been up and down this country in hobby stores all the time. You just don't see it, man. So, yeah. Unfortunately, dealing with the levels of suspicion, derision, and arrogance of that person wasn't even an exceptional experience for a lot of our customers, even the adults. The city had an established old money, white upper class with an outsized influence and overrepresentation in city government, public school boards, criminal justice system, etc., despite only living in a small percentage of the city. Unfortunately, this fairly typical example of redlining and casual racism in US cities is relevant. It's also worth pointing out for American listeners that this city is an extremely liberal northern blue state. Okay. Also, I grew up in a 97% white Midwestern small town, so when issues of bias come up, my first assumption tends to be class/income, since that was the biggest divide I grew up with. Realising this is not necessarily the case everywhere, I've been working on my own assumptions and trying to listen to and incorporate the experiences of people around me, even if I do not always get it right. So that is to say, my assessment of the situation is not my blue hair growing back, but largely due to the conversations I had in the weeks after. Okay, alright. I always like it when people explain what they mean by, when they make these vast statements of, this is just in our cities. Well, explain, qualify it, which you did, so good. Okay, now was another good time for a sip of tea. What did I tell you? What did I tell you? I may as well be sitting on her lap, being patted on the head. Okay, now was another good time for a sip of tea, as the scene is set for a warm summer afternoon on one of my rare days off, when I'm sipping my own iced tea in the nearby coffee shop. I set my work phone in front of me, as the store will still have just opened a bit ago, and start my personal work. I barely begin warming up when I get a text from the counter worker on the shift. We'll call him Sven. Just saying, hey, I'm about to ruin your day. The cops were at the game store. So, So? Why would that matter? I ran out of the coffee shop, leaving my half-eaten sandwich along with my bag and work supplies. When I flung the store door open about 30 seconds later, there were 3 cops standing in front of our magic case with our magic guy employee, Fox, pleading with them, and Sven looking helpless and confused. Ah, so Sven's in the store. Right, so you're in the coffee shop across the road. Sven's working in your store. Right, okay, got you. Got you. When you said the counter worker on shift, I assumed you meant the counter worker in the coffee shop. Am I the only one who came to that conclusion? Anyway. That's bad. That's bad. Alright. Out of breath... Sorry, I'm going to have to take a sip of tea here. Alright, there we go. Out of breath and flustered, I try to project some kind of authority as I slide behind the counter. I'm here, okay, yes, I'm one of the managers, how can I help you? I said. The officers get right to the point. They suspect us of having stolen cards. Not just any stolen cards, but this man's binder, which was stolen out of the trunk of his car whilst he was parked downtown. They indicate a fairly nondescript guy standing between them, who I vaguely recognised as having played in the store before, but not frequently. I'm going to just call him Mark. I don't know his real name anyway. In the time before I got there, they had asked him which cards he had in his binder, and he had been pointing them out in the case. Our main magic case was primarily standard cards. That is, cards that were recently released and currently legal in tournament play. While some stores priced every card in individual sleeves, we had clear clamshell boxes that could fit about 25 cards with a single price sticker to facilitate quick price changes. It was the week after a new set release, so we had brought a lot of new cards at the events we hosted as people opened packs and trade in duplicates for more packs. This means that when Mark pointed out the cards in the case, he was indicating a pile of identical cards rather than a single card. So I picked up one of the first boxes in question, containing Elspeth, one of the recently released Planeswalkers that had a decent value, probably $10 to $25. There were about 5 copies inside, and I took one out of the box and handed it to the officers. "Is this your card?" they asked Mark. He hesitated. I don't know." They turned to me and asked, "Can you find his card?" "Well, they're all the same," I shrug. "So unless he marks his cards, I wouldn't be able to tell it apart from the others. But collectors don't usually mark their cards because it lowers the value." Dude, if I was the police officer here, I'd be like rolling my eyes going, "Oh my god, these nerds, man." These nerds. I wanted a quiet shift. These goddamn nerds. The officer, I later learned, was the lead detective and turned to Mark to ask if he marked his cards, how he would know one of the cards in the case was his, and so on. Fox was fighting back, interrupting, as this is clearly what he was trying to explain when I walked in. There's no way to determine if any specific card in the box was the one from the stolen binder. Cards being as perfect and identical as possible is the point. Unfortunately, this wasn't the sort of detective was used. This wasn't the sort of thing the detective was used to, as the stolen property he usually tracks down has serial numbers, license plates, small scratches, and damage the owner knows about. Insert T-sip as the detective thinks for a minute. Okay, right, okay. Yes, mother. The detective turns to me and says, "Okay, give me the box then." I stare at him until he points to the clamshell in my hand with the other 4 cards. Yeah, this guy just doesn't get it. He doesn't understand. What? Why? If he had one Elspeth in the binder and they're all identical, then the one I gave you would be the same thing. "These cards are evidence. We're seizing them. They will be returned to you after the investigation is over." I insist that any sets of cards from the case would be the same and there's no way to tell them apart, but 3 armed police officers are frowning at me, leaning in and growing suspicious. Behind me, Fox and Sven are panicking. The owner hasn't made it in yet and they don't know how soon he'll get there. At this point, it's clear they aren't going to leave without exactly what they asked for. I can't delay anymore, and maybe cuffing me for questioning them and trying to explain how collectible cards work isn't out of the question, so they can get their evidence and get on with their day. I hand the officer holding Elspeth the clamshell case. The doctor turns back to Mark. What other cards were in the binder? I take out the next clamshell, packed with $5 rares, a staple everybody is going to be asking for this week as they build their decks with a new set. I go to open it and the detective extends his hand. I hand him the box containing $100 worth of merchandise. Dude, I completely understand why you're complying here, but whilst you need to say something to this absolute idiot who got his card stolen, and say, you know how this works. You know this is nonsense, right? You know this is absolute nonsense. You know how this works. I could give you your cards back right now, and we'd save all of this, but they're taking my entire inventory of cards because you won't stand up for yourself and you won't tell them what needs to happen now. He hands it over to the other officer, who puts it in a plastic bag. Mark points to the next one. He thinks he's getting these cards, doesn't he? A $10 card. There are between 5 and 8 cards in that box, which go into the plastic bag. Fox sits down, overwhelmed, fighting back tears. Sven is in shock and silently takes over removing the boxes as the detective turns to me to ask more questions. I glance at Mark, and he's got a shit-eating grin on as he points out the cards, and hundreds of dollars of inventory go into the bag. Dude, he thinks he's getting these cards. He's a moron. I know he's had his binder stolen, and I feel really bad for him, but it's not like the officers are going to give him these cards to make up for it. Several pay periods worth of income are going to collect dust on a shelf alongside drugs, guns, scraps of fabric with blood on hair on them, and such in the basement of the police department, and they're not even informative evidence. The employees on the store weren't even being charged with anything. Our whole involvement is alleged at this point. The detective asks about how we buy and sell cards, whether we have cameras, and so on. I confirm that we brought several collections, including whole binders over the weekend, as the new release is a busy time, and we give out either store credit or cash for these. We have a camera behind the counter, but I don't have the password to get the footage. Because of the new release, there were also a lot of people I didn't recognise over the last 3 days or so. As this is going on, some customers approach the door like they're going to come in, see the cops, and decide to come back later. The ones already in the store when they arrived are silent and stuck further back in the store. Gradually, his questions start turning into a lecture on how to run a business, oh for God's sake, telling me all the things I'm doing wrong, even though 9 out of 10 of the topics are the owner's job, not mine, and how awful the store is, and so on. I zone out a bit as it starts feeling like he doesn't have any more questions, so it's more like my mum scolding me. They've pretty much finished loading the now bulging bag when he scoffs. Besides, you need to type your customers, then you wouldn't be in this situation. I snap back to attention, confused. Excuse me? The officer's expression and posture has completely shifted from the beginning of our interaction. He doesn't think I'm guilty anymore. Now he thinks I'm the biggest moron in the city, and he can't believe he has to explain 2 plus 2 to an adult. Type your customers. What type of people play these games, refuse to buy cards from people who aren't that type? My highly neurodivergent brain takes this very literally, and I mentally flip through all of our customers to find a pattern that doesn't exist. I don't understand all types of people play here. He narrows his eyes, regards me as if I'm purposefully dumb or playing dumb, and heads out the door. Think about it, he says. When he leaves, some of the regulars who were stuck in the back the whole time come up to the counter to support us, expressing shock and anger at the almost empty magic case. They give Fox hugs and buy a pile of snacks and soda with lots of finalies. Sven turns to me and asks, "Wait, what was that supposed to mean?" I stare at him blankly and shrug. One of the regulars, an extremely friendly and quiet college-age Southeast Asian guy who plays, buys and sells cards for pretty much all games we carry, answers in short, He thinks this stuff is for white people and doesn't want you to buy cards from us. Especially the, the City High kids. Sven, a totally innocent summer child, says, "But then your Yu-Gi-Oh case would be empty." And then everybody laughed and held hands, and the credits rolled as we sang the closing song. We all sipped some tea, and so can you. Okay, it wasn't exactly a happy ending anyway. The owner was furious when he arrived, not at me. He said I did the right thing handing the cards over. He started a policy of holding collections over a certain value for 24 hours before buying them. We barely had any stock from the new set when people started arriving, looking to build for the new meta. It took months to rebuild the case, and Fox had to testify in court on behalf of the store. I hope they caught the guys breaking into cars, but they never returned the cards taken as evidence, and I never saw Mark again either. I swear to God, if they gave this douchebag the cards, you know what I mean? Like, here's why I think Mark's a douchebag, right? Just bear with me, okay? He stood there, and he's a Magic the Gathering player. He knows full well, what is going on with Magic the Gathering, right? He knows that in doing things like this, you need to... Well, he knows that you could have absolutely, given him his cards back out of the goodness of your heart, right? Even if you didn't steal them, and even if his cards aren't in your store, you could have said, "Listen, write down all the cards that were in your deck here, and I'll go and get them for you." As a gesture of goodwill, because it's really awful this happened to you. And he would have gone, "Yeah, okay, right." He could have said, "Listen, if you just let me write down my cards that I'd lost, I can hand them over and they can give them back to me." That would have been fine. But the minute the police officer starts putting whole packs into the bag, he thinks he's getting all those cards, so he keeps his mouth shut, and he makes everybody's life harder. The owner has to go to court, and they don't even get their cards back. Thousands of dollars worth of inventory gone, because this guy tried to be a selfish prick and get ahead of the system. This guy's a thief as well. I'm telling you now. He may have gotten stuff stolen from him, but in my eyes, this guy's a thief. He's really hoping that the police officers are just going to give him the cards. And they might have done, If they said, "You can't have your cards back," they might have given him those cards, because they don't know how Magic the Gathering works. They're normies. They might have gone, "Oh, right, this is stolen inventory. Yeah, you can have them back," right? You never know. He might be sitting on all those cards even today. He could have made the situation a lot simpler by just saying, "Yeah, let me just write down the cards that I'd lost in the pack. There you go." And you go, "Oh, do you know what? We'll give you these back as a gesture of goodwill. We didn't steal them from you. Like, we didn't even know that, we had to bind like that, but here's your cards back. No problem." You would have lost a couple of $100 worth of cards. Everyone's a winner, right? It sucks, but the police get to go carry on with their jobs. They've got better things to do than search for magic cards. The guy gets his cards back, and you get to get on with your day, right? And you don't lose thousands of dollars worth of inventory. But no, he had to be greedy, didn't he? He had to, really strain my faith in humanity. Because when people are trying to help him, he decides to be a little snake and try and take advantage. He's as bad as the people who stole his own magic cards. I'm telling you now. Awful. And of course you never saw him again, Liv. He's got the cards. I'm telling you now, he's got the cards from the police. Of course you never saw him again. Asshole, man. Anyway, that provides an example why magic cards are so common to steal. If you need a quick buck, there's a resale market that can give you cash, even if they're only a few dollars a card. If you're looking to add them to your deck, you can just say you cracked them in a pack, like the absolute piece of shit we ended up banning from our store. Ironically, he wasn't the type the detective warned us about, and to watch out for, and slowly bled out hundreds of dollars worth of cards from other players and the store. But that's a story for another day. Please tell me. Liv, you can write. You can write very well, so please come back and tell me about that. That's really interesting. And whether you keep or sell them, mint and very good condition cards are close to untraceable once they're mixed in with other cards or sleeved for a deck. Even more so if the cards were originally in a binder. If the police tested the cards they took from us, the only fingerprints or DNA on any stolen cards probably would have been a store employee. A lot of collectors also try to not get the oils from their hands on their cards and sleeve them as soon as they open them, and the thieves don't have to take them out of the binder before selling. So yeah, never leave your binder or bag unattended at events, even if you're in a friendly store that you've been going to for a long time. 24-hour and/or ID policy is essential if you're a store owner that buys cards in addition to a camera that points towards the counter and assess players based on whether they're actual slimy douche nozzles. Anyway, thanks for all you do. Cheers, mate, the Hobbyists. Cheers, thank you very much. And send me that follow-up. I want to hear about what happened to the other guy there. Alright. Moving onwards and upwards. It's a hobby nightmare from Dan. Now, I was going to read the final part of the Jensen Chronicles today, right? Because it has been sent in. Excitement, I know. Right, it has been sent in. We have the end of the Jensen Chronicle in my inbox, ready to go. I've read it. It's brilliant. It even has a picture, right? That will be on Friday. I think it'll be a good end of the week treat, alright? That's when it'll be. For now, I'm going to read Dan's, because this is also a very, very, very good one. Alright? Cool. So, Dan says, Good Arvo North, Dan from New Zealand here. Using my name is fine. I have nothing to hide, as this is a story from the distant past. A past when I was an active player in the Warhammer Fantasy Battles and 40k community. It's a bit of a long one though. Make sure you have some of that vile swill you call Yorkshire tea handy. How dare you, sir? How dare you? If you were in this room now and I had a glove, I'd slap you in the face with it. Outside. You have no honour. This is my second attempt at sending through a nightmare, though a more retelling than an actual nightmare. It probably didn't get enough because... it probably didn't get through because you're not a huge fan of RTF PDFs. No, I'm not. If you send me a PDF file, I'm probably not going to... PDF file. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? If you send me through a PDF file, I'm not going to read it out because what I do is I copy and paste your Hobby Nightmares onto a separate Word document, right? And I read it from there. Because I can check the spelling really quickly. I can check everything really quickly, make sure it's all, and I can put it in a readable format. So there's a lot of Hobby Nightmares that I have to break up. They're in one big block of text, and I break it up into, paragraphs that I can read more easily. So yeah, that's what I do. Anyway, your prize is... I started playing at the tail end of 2nd edition 40k, and left just after 6th edition's launch as my life took a large change and hobby time was a luxury I couldn't afford, both with time and financially. Over the 10 years I played, I collected a few armies, as this was common at the time. Eldar, High Elves, World Eaters, Raven Guard, and I'm ashamed to admit it, Space Wolves. Don't be ashamed, man. Like what you like. I don't have to like what you like, and you don't have to like what I like. It's all good. I considered myself a tournament player, but 99% of my games would be social games at home, Games Workshop, or at a friend's place. I loved showing up to tourneys with my army and trying to eke out wins with my fluffy but semi-effective lists. I enjoyed playing against a variety of players, and since I'd normally place in the middle, most of my games were enjoyable 2 to 3 hour games where I learned new tricks, met new people, and in general would have a ball for the weekend. The best part would be travelling to a different city to raise hell in their nightlife, and many tournaments involved me showing up green in the gills or popping ibuprofen and copious amounts of water to a place where I'd lost the night before. You sound like a man after my own heart, dude. One day near the end of Warhammer Fantasy Battle 6th edition, I'd come into my local Games Workshop at lunch to pick up this month's White Dwarf, and was just wandering around the store when Mike, a regular in the store and a face from previous tournament, said, "Hey man, are you coming to the Warlords, a large gaming club in my city? Fantasy tourney in 2 weeks. We're still short a few bodies." I thought about it for a second because at the time I had gone off Warhammer Fantasy Battles and was tossing up sinking more money into my mounted Fire Dragon Eldar army for the Games Workshop official nationals later that year. but considering I was single at the time and had a bit of free time, and the appeal of waking up hungover on yet another Sunday morning had worn off, I said, you know what? Sure. I know you can't give me specifics on, but how competitive are the lists going to be? I really don't want to spend the weekend being used to mop the hall's floor, you know what I mean? His reply was as expected. There are a fair few quite strong lists so far, so the competition will be a bit rough, but I'm sure you'll do fine. After going to the ATM and withdrawing my entry fee, I took Miles' email down and went back to browsing the shelves. When I approached the counter with White Dwarf in hand, the store manager asked, I saw you talking to Mike. Did he get you into the tourney? I nodded, and the store manager said, you're actually going to try and do well this time? Or are you just going to play for fun? I thought about it for a moment and thought to myself, you know what? Screw it. If there's going to be a few strong lists, why not go there with a comparable army? I spent the next week writing and rewriting my list, shaving points here, adding items here and there, tweaking and adjusting as I went. After at least 6 different drafts, I settled on a list I was happy with and emailed it off to Mike along with my registration details. It consisted of 3 mages, a couple of units of archers, 1 unit of Sea Guard, 1 unit of Silver Helms, set up to be 1 hit and quit, 2 units of Reavers, and my 2 bolt throwers. I had tossed up putting in Swordmasters and Spearmen, but it would have weakened my range punch substantially, and my 2 Greater Eagles were ideal, while ideal in this list, were unavailable to play, as I was using dragons from Warhammer Armageddon. Let's see if people actually can remember that from the early 2000s. As stand-ins for my Caledonian army. I might have made a competitive list, but I still had some standards. The day of the tourney arrived, and thanks to the location at my former college, which was just across the park from where I was living at the time, I rocked up well rested and freshly shaved, showered and deodorized. Guys, if you're going to a tourney, especially in the summer, make sure you're clean, your clothes are clean, you're deodorized, and you have a can/stick of deodorant in your tournament bag. It's as important as if not more important than your rulebook. Standing around talking bullshit with my friend, who was a Games Workshop employee, and still is, he told me about the rumours he'd heard through the grapevine. Apparently, there were some absolute shockers of an army list kicking around, including a flying vampire circus, as he put it, a plague rat army, and a plague rat army. Okay, this is a bit odd the way this is put. I'm going to read it verbatim, and you guys can decide if this sentence works or not, right? A plague rat army and or would not be effective, and strategies that would just not work. I don't know what that means, but I'm moving on. At 9 AM, the draws were announced. My first opponent? The Vampire Circus, consisting of a heap of skirmishing bats, wolves, and 3 flying Strigoi vampires, with a couple of units of Skelly Bros to flesh out the base requirements. I deployed as planned, a long, thin line of white and silver at the 6-inch mark, with the enemy confounding move all 3 of my mages at the utter limit of my deployment zone, closest to the enemy, with 1 unit of cavalry on each flank. Okay. When we're writing game stuff, what's happening, general views will be fine. I don't need a blow by blow. You know what I mean? Do you know what I'm saying? Sorry if you had to move my mic there. There we go. Giving my opponent the first turn, I watched as he came across the board at a shambling stroll, with his flanks shooting forward. His vampire lord wedged into one of the blocks of skellies, and both his upper and lesser vampires in the giant bat unit and direwolf units. Shutting down his repeated attempts to cast Van Hell's Dance, his army stalled almost point blank, with his lesser vampires unable to charge, and monster the single rank archer units in front of him. My turn opened predictably, the Reavers racing past the bats to gain a flanking position, while the Silver Helms repeated to this position and positioned themselves up on the opposite flank. Then the magic phase happened, with a couple of casts of Fury of Cain, Flames of the Phoenix, and the use of the Ring of Black Iron. His flanking forces, the bats, wolves, and both his lesser vampires, disappeared into a cloud of ash, the fire from the spells, negating the regenerate ability he had taken for the thralls. Moving on to the shooting phase, I opened up with all of my ranged arrows, bolts, and pulverized the main unit of skeletons, reducing them to half strength. The rest of the game was what would be what you would consider standard fare. Rains of arrows and fire into the lumbering, unable to march skeletons. I let my opponent reinforce his Lord's unit of skeletons, only to remove the entire regiment the following magic phase and inflicting most of the Lord's wounds. The rest of the game was a barrage of spells, failed charges, and arrows, removing chunks of his army at a go. When the smoke cleared, I'd managed to destroy everything except his Lord, as I'd baited him into charging one of my cav units and sending him off to buttfuck nowhere. 1-0. Not a bad start for the tournament. Yeah, this isn't going the way I thought it was going to go. Do you know what I mean? If this next game goes into really exhaustive detail, I'm going to just skip it and move on to the next part, okay? My second game was against the Plague Lord of Clan Pestilence. This presented a few issues, as not only were the rats tougher than normal, they were screened by a lot of sensor bearers, but I stuck to my deployment plan, but needed to delay flanking them, as there was very little room for the Silver Helms to get around to where they needed to be. My opponent had 3 huge blocks of Plague Priests with a couple of units of Clan Rats. The Reavers had no issue with their skirmish rules and quickly zipped around one flank, having to plan ahead an extra turn. Again, a storm of arrows and fire burned off the skirmishing sensor bearers and inflicting a few casualties on one of the blocks of Plague Priests. In my opponent's turn, most of his host rumbled forward at the march, with me only being able to snare one of the infantry blocks with my Reaver's ability to remove their ability to double move. He cast a few spells, then handed over the turn to me. My Reavers moved further around his army, snaring 2 more units, while the Silver Helms manoeuvred for a flanking charge in the following turn, not to win the combat, but to bait the frenzy rule of that they had to pursue, stranding them in no man's land in the middle of the table, while my ranged and spells dealt to what was trundling towards me. Okay. Alright. More flaming arrows later, I removed 1.5 blocks of Plague Priests, broke the Clan Rats by depriving them of their rank bonus, then running them down with the flanking only full strength Plague Priest unit. Okay. After that, the writing was on the wall, and it was 2-0, and both victories were near full points. The day drew to a close. I went back to my apartment with my friends. They stacked up their cases by my door, and we went out for our traditional dinner and drinks. Things get a little blurry, but considering I was 26 at the time, I took it easier than I normally would have. Pouring myself into bed at 1 AM, I set my alarm and went to sleep, only to be woken by my friends knocking on my door like a pack of hungover zombies 15 minutes before the draw would be announced. I gave them my case, told them I'd be right over, and rolled my mildly hungover self into the shower and popped down the dairy for a pie and a bottle of orange juice with a Barocca dropped into it. Feeling at least partially human, I crossed the muddy park, nearly ending up on my prat a few times, that's backside for those of you in America, and got into the hall just as the draw was being announced. Right. I honestly can't remember my third game, or even which army they played, but I'm pretty sure it was Greenskins. I know I won, and I'm assuming it was fairly convincing, as my last game of the tournament was on table 1 against Steve. Name changed because reasons. Taking stock in between games, as my hangover had miraculously disappeared, I was 3-0 out of 4 games. I wasn't going to win Best Army or Best Painted, and whilst I was always a good opponent to play against, and always was marked high, I never would be a winner of the Best Sportsmanship prize, as I was too normal. So my only chance lay in beating Steve convincingly and taking overall winner or best general. I knew that overall would be possible as my army was not the best painted, but was good enough, my sportsmanship was good enough, and the wins I would have would push me over the top. Steve was a bit of a local legend in the Warhammer community, as he'd won and been winning a lot of tournaments over the years. He was a very good player, with a very, very cutthroat set of lists, and was absolutely ruthless with measuring distances and his rules interpretations. I'd played against him on one of the Nationals a few years prior, and he had completely wiped the floor with me with his Chaos Dwarves. Steve was a top bloke, and if asked, he'd let you know where you went wrong, and be brutally honest if he thought your list was doomed from the get-go. As soon as he handed me his list, I knew I was in trouble. Flicking through both pages of his list, I knew I was done for from the get-go. At the top was his Beastmen Shaman Lord. 2 Beastmen Shaman, they're nearly a page and 3/4 of unit of 6 Ungor with melee weapons and shield. Of 16, sorry. Units of 16 Ungors with melee weapons and shields. Looking at his overall model count, it was resting at nearly 250 models compared to my 60-ish, and it was only getting worse from there. And here we are, ladies and gentlemen. Here we are. Here we are. Why does North not do tournaments? This is why. Because if I came up against a guy like this, I would just lose it. I'd be like, nah man, this is ridiculous. I was just going to get my absolute shit pushed in. What's the point? Like, I wouldn't go crazy. I'd play the game, but I wouldn't have fun. It's a foregone conclusion. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, we both set up. I was done deploying well before Steve, and he plonked down block after block of Ungors, forming a continuous wall of brown fur, horns and shields. My initial plan of wiping out a flanking unit and scooting my cavalry around one flank was dead on arrival, and I racked my brain to come up with an alternative. I figured, hey, cross-march my cav across the board whilst baiting charges could work, then punch out his centre with ranged and spells and try to roll one flank for a draw. That could work. I knew I couldn't slow his horde significantly, and that a draw would be the best I could get out of it. Having to change my mindset from winning is the most important to not losing was a trick I hadn't thought of prior, and it was a very hard adjustment to make mentally. I lost the first turn, and the Beastman horde trundled forward, launching a barrage of spells, inflicting casualties spread amongst my archers. Looking at the small handful of corpses on the edge of the table, I realised I could use my mages as bait for charges too, and shot them forward on foot, angling them as if to charge later it would send other units into the path of his army, fouling up his movement and breaking up the cohesiveness of his line. I opened up the magic phase and had a much less effective time than I had in my earlier games. Oh, that's not good. He burnt 3 scrolls of Dispel, countered the rest of my casts, and only the Ring of Black Iron inflicted any casualties. Almost cheerfully removing the couple of models I had killed, he commented, "Well, that's the worst over and done with," as I moved into my shooting phase. Dude, that's the kind of attitude that would trigger me. I know a lot of you would be like, oh North, come on. But I'm serious. That's the kind of attitude that makes me go, oh, you know, oh, is that all you've got? You know, that kind of thing. Especially when you've got an army there that is literally set up to win. It's set up to win right from the get-go when you come with that kind of attitude. Anyway. Arrows and bolts rained down on the centremost regiment in his army, but small handful... Sorry, I'm going to read that again. But to minimal effect. Okay, fair enough. That's fair enough. To minimal effect. By the end of my shooting phase and magic phase, I had killed 12 models, and he was 2 turns away from charging me. I was done. I knew at that point the best I could achieve wasn't a draw, but a slightly less embarrassing reaming in front of everybody. All that remained was to play out the game, shake his hand, and congratulate him on first place. Speaking to Steve afterwards, I asked him, "So, what could I have done better?" And his response was, "Nah, you were doomed from the start. You had the entirely wrong army to combat mine, and the only thing that could have helped was taking some flyers to disrupt my movement, or some units that were capable of inflicting some serious punch, like heavy cab, sword masters, or white lions." Again, this is why I don't play at tournaments. Oh, so what you're telling me is I've wasted my fucking time. Brilliant. That's what I would get from this. Call me salty if you like, but I like to be involved in my games. You know? Honestly. This is the kind of player where I'd be like, so what you're saying is there, Steve, is that I've wasted my fucking time. Right? Do you know what I mean? There's one thing that I do love about Warhammer, though. The old Warhammer. Is the way you described your battles here really made me want to play Warhammer. Do you know why? Because when you were talking about breaking a line, or turning a flank, or rolling up a flank, or concentrating fire, that is the kind of thing you will read in an actual book about ancient battles and medieval battles, right? Rolling up flanks, you know, breaking through lines, trying to split a line with formation baiting, you know. I love the fact that you were trying to bait the opposition general into breaking up his own line by charging you to create space in his line for you to charge through with some of your own units. That's cool. Dan, that's not the kind of thing you do in Warhammer 40k. Do you know what I'm saying? You're not going to get that kind of an experience in Warhammer 40k. This is really cool. This is really, really cool. And it makes me wish they would bring back like Warhammer Historical or Warhammer Ancient Battles, because those were amazing. Anyway, we all packed up the terrain, folded the tables, stacked the chairs, and drifted around looking at other games in progress. Warlords was a sizable club, and had many different competitions going on. Warhammer 40k, Lord of the Rings, and other historical war games were starting to wind down, while Mike was tabulating the results. Handing out our overall scorecards for the event, I saw that sure enough my predictions were right. I didn't get best army, best sportsman, or best general, and my overall score of 3-1 was not going to be good enough to get the overall win. Steve won overall and top general. I can't remember who got the other prizes, but after the last prize was given out, Mike had something else. He said, "I've never been to or run a tournament where anyone's army has ever received as much dread to face before, and as a result, I have one more prize to hand out. Dan, congratulations, you have won worst army to play against." And saying this, he reached into his prize box and pulled out a pack of Chesdale cheddar cheese slices, handing it to me. Over the guffaws of my opponents, I flushed a little, thanked him, and told him, "Thanks, Mike, I'll make sure it goes to good use." I love that he gives you some cheese. That's a really good way of doing it, right? You brought such a cheesy list that I give you some cheese. That was my last tournament. I'd like to say that playing an army like that was fun and exciting, but the initial fun of reducing my opponent's army to ash was outweighed by the fact I could see their faces getting darker and darker the deeper into the game we got. If I got back into the hobby, I'd still go to tournaments, but I'd be going back to playing armies that I find fun, not that are geared to win. The biggest lesson I learned, though, no matter how good a list you have, there's always someone out there that will counter it. Thanks, North, for reading, and peace out from the land of the long white cloud. Alright, I agree. And your hobby nightmare is an absolutely, how do I put this, atypical notion of why I don't do tournaments, right? If this is the kind of thing that sounds fun to you, dude, go and play in tournaments, you'll love them. Absolutely. Brilliant. Go and play in them, you'll love them, it'll be great. This isn't my kind of thing, though. I'll be honest with you, it isn't my kind of thing. It's not really my kind of... Let's all sit down and play a foregone conclusion. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to play a game where... Oh, yeah, you wanted to come in with your army and have fun? Yeah, well, that's not happening because, you know, I brought this army and you've got no chance, so... No point even turning up, really. You know, that kind of a thing. That kind of thing. So yeah, I don't really do these kind of tournaments because, again, I've been invited to a few. I don't know, man. I don't know. I like my games to be narrative, and you never know what's going to happen. You just never know what's going to happen. And if a game is a foregone conclusion, and then my opponent says, "Yeah, you never really had a chance," I'd be like, "Well, could you have not told me that after turn 3, and we could have just called it and not wasted my time?" You know what I mean? Because winning isn't a huge thing to me, but being involved in a competitive game where I'm having fun with somebody opposite me, that is important to me. That's the point, right? Honestly, couldn't care less about winning, but I could care quite a lot about having some fun and playing a decent game, you know? Anyway, love you a long time. I will speak to you tomorrow for some more Hobby Nightmares. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you then. Have a good one. Bye now.